Welcome to the Clear Admit MBA Admissions Podcast. I'm Graham Richmond, and this is your wiretaps for Monday, August 4th, 2025. I'm joined by Alex Brown from Cornwall, England. Alex, how are things going?
Very good, thank you, Graham.
So is it like excessively hot in Cornwall right now? Because it's been just really terribly hot in America. I'm over on this side of the Atlantic at the moment, and in the Philadelphia area, it has just been muggy and like 95 degrees Fahrenheit every day.
No, it's beautiful here.
Oh, well, I'll have to get back to the other side of the Atlantic to find some good weather. As you know, I'm like on this sort of road trip, family stuff, work stuff. So it's going to be a fun couple of weeks over here in the States. But what's going on in the MBA admissions world? Have you seen much activity on the site, or is there anything you want to comment on that's happening?
I mean, quite frankly, it's pretty quiet, right? So yeah. I imagine with the end of July recording, by the time it's broadcast beginning of August, schools are starting to get ready for their preterm. So yeah, I'd assume things are pretty much finalised in terms of the class coming in, and we're about 1 month away from round one deadline. So good luck.
Yeah, wow, it's going to be a sprint to those round one deadlines. I have, you're correct. I've been seeing posts on LinkedIn from many of the admissions directors that I'm connected with, where they take a picture of some event and they're like, "Hey, our students have arrived." And this is, from working in admissions, this is one of those great moments in the year where the class that you've assembled actually shows up on campus, and you get to see how they get along, and just welcome them into your community. So it's definitely that time of year.
Yeah, as long as they do show up.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So you're going to be busy this coming week on Thursday. I hear you're doing this webinar called How to Get into the M7 MBA Programs, and we've teamed up with our friends over at Leland to do this. And so you're going to MC a webinar where you pepper 3 admissions consultants with questions about the M7. And I believe one of the panelists is a Stanford GSB grad, another worked in admissions at Booth. So it seems like a good group. And this is at 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific on Thursday, August 7th. You can register at bit.ly/M7 Clear Admit. So it's the letter M, the number 7, Clear Admit, all one word, all lowercase. Alex, anything, do you care to dangle any kind of tidbits of what you're hoping to accomplish with this webinar?
Well, I'm actually just quite excited. I haven't hosted a webinar like this for quite some time. And to just get other industry experts' point of views on questions that are really important for our candidates, and I'll try to keep it as transparent and as real as possible. So make sure their answers pass the sniff test anyway.
Yeah.
I'm really excited for it, and it sort of gave me the idea that we should get back into hosting these monthly webinars ourselves, Graham. We don't need to talk about that right now, but certainly as the season gets closer to kicking off, I think monthly webinars where we just invite folks to ask us questions and that kind of stuff, I think that would be really cool.
Yeah, we've got something in the works on that front. So yeah, stay tuned. Yeah. That should be fun. The other thing I just wanted to mention as we get closer to deadlines, Lauren on our team does this every week and has been doing so, I think, for at least a month, maybe more. But I just wanted to mention, we have this column that we run on the website called the Weekly Refresh. And what Lauren does with this column is she basically reviews each of the schools. Like there's a list of here are the schools that updated their essay topics. Here are the schools that announced their deadlines or their apps went live, et cetera. So it's kind of a week-by-week update on what's out and what's been released, and usually with links to our analysis if a school has new essays, et cetera. So you can read that on the site, but I just see her doing that every week, and I wanted to throw some props her way, and I think you help. Do you help with that too, Alex, or is that, I'm getting mixed up? You do something else with deadlines when we get into the season, right?
Yeah, I'm absolutely nothing, no help at all.
All right. Well, anyway, hats off to Lauren, and you can read that post. I mean, it's just something good to sort of keep an eye on. The other thing we did is we ran an admissions tip. Peggy on our team wrote this great piece about English language tests. So not relevant if you're a native English speaker, but if you're not, the most of the schools will require proof of English proficiency. And so we did this complete sort of breakdown of the TOEFL, the IELTS, the Pearson test of English, and the Duolingo English test. So lots of tidbits in there about how these tests work, how they're structured, how to prep for them. And it's just a really good primer if you're someone who falls into that bucket of having to take one of these tests. So you can check that out on the site.
I'll take credit for that one then.
Yeah, I know. You had said, right? I was just about to say that you had been like beating the drum of, hey, why don't we have anything about these tests? So that's great to see.
Yeah. And that came from one of your Adcom Q&As. I think it was Stern, maybe. But they talk about the importance of these tests for international students. And I'm like, we have no admissions tip that covers this subject.
Yeah. I would argue they're increasingly important if you think about the fact that now international students who are non-native English speakers have their friend ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever they're using to polish up that English in the essays. And so you're left with an English language exam and maybe an interview as your means of sort of figuring these people's English skill out or their level out.
Yeah.
So anyway, so you can read that on the site. We also continue with our admissions director Q&As. We caught up with Rupal Gadhia from Harvard Business School. As you may know, Rupal graduated from HBS back in 2004. So she's an HBS grad. And, we asked her a whole bunch of questions, as we always do. And the one that I wanted to highlight in this episode of the show here is we asked her about the interview process. And she said, I'll just quote her. She said, "One thing that is different in our interview process is that we do not use students, faculty, or alumni volunteers for our interviews. We have about 24 individuals on our interview board who receive regular training and each conduct many interviews. This helps us stay calibrated and consistent. An HBS interview lasts 30 minutes. Because the interview is a conversation about you, there are no brain teasers, mental math problems, case questions, or anything like that. Although we may reference your resume in the interview, we try to go much deeper. We may dive into something you wrote in an essay, a short answer field, or something a recommender might have mentioned. Through this conversation, we hope to learn more about your experiences, leadership abilities, and the impact you hope to make through business." So, Alex, I just wanted to call attention to that because HBS's interview is quite different.
Yeah. And I will say that the preparation ahead of conducting an HBS interview is much more complicated and it takes a lot more time and effort and energy than the preparation for blind interviews and resume-based interviews. So kudos to HBS for taking that additional step. And there are a couple of other schools that kind of go down this path, right? So they're additive interviews. They don't, just want you to repeat necessarily your goals, et cetera, that's part of your other application materials, but they want to dive deeper. They want to really uncover aspects that maybe you surfaced in other elements of the application. So yeah, I think it's a really great process, but I will say that it requires a lot of work on HBS's part to prepare for those interviews. And how do you prepare as a candidate? Just know your application. If you wrote it in your essay, you better be prepared to back it up.
Yeah, and I would argue you need to, it's like a peeling of the onion, where the outside layers are the app, but you've got to be able to get into the core and share additional details. That's one of the real challenges is that you can't just sit back and be like, sort of, regurgitate the same stuff you said in the application. They're looking to go deeper. So you got to be ready for that if you're fortunate enough to get an invite. So I really appreciate Rupal taking time to do that.
And quite honestly, Graham, I never thought about this, but that might be a reason why HBS does take a deeper cut, right?
Yeah.
Versus its peers in terms of who it's going to interview, because frankly, the resource applied to the actual interview is quite burdensome for HBS. So they do, like some schools generally, maybe they interview 50% of folks that apply. HBS maybe 20, 30%.
Yeah, that's right.
So that might be one of the reasons.
Yeah, it's just so time consuming. In any event, so really appreciate Rupal making time to check in with us on that. We also caught up with Maria Pineda, who is the admissions director at University of Maryland Smith School of Business. And we asked Maria about essays, and she gave some good advice there. She said, first of all, that at least 3 admissions committee members will read your essay, so make sure that it conveys your truths. She then says, help us understand your thought process, your future plans, and your expectations. Communicate your understanding of how the Maryland MBA can help you grow as a strong individual. Hearing your perspective helps us learn more about you. Great essays are authentic. We want to know who you are and where you want to go. If we know these facts, we can determine how the Maryland MBA can bridge the gap between where you are now and your post-MBA goals. We want your essay to be concise. However, we want you to ensure that you include relevant details not found anywhere else in your application. When you sit down to write your essay, remember that this is the only forward-thinking aspect of your application. All other components that you will submit are historical information. Use this real estate to shed light on who you are and where you want to be. So I thought that was an interesting take too, this notion of, forward-looking versus historical stuff.
Yeah, no, I love that. But like you say, the last aspect of that advice, really, really interesting. But again, I think it applies to all schools. Mm-hmm. But the essay is obviously your opportunity in the first cut to tell your story, but also to look at where you're planning to go, why it all makes sense, etc., etc. So yeah, very good.
Yeah, totally. So the only other news I have before we talk about this week's candidates is that we ran a special, again, a bonus episode of the podcast last week. It's in this feed wherever you're listening to this show. You should be able to find it. And it's a really interesting episode that we recorded in Boston with Susan Caraviello, who is over at Bain. She runs their HR kind of hiring practice for MBA grads. And she herself actually went to Tuck and did an MBA there. So she's been at Bain for a really long time. I know she says it in the interview, I want to say 20 plus years, and knows a ton about their recruiting process and what it takes to get into a place like Bain as a strategy consultant. So we recorded an interview that I did with her at the MBA Fair in Boston. It's now available to listen to here. And yeah, a lot of really good advice in there. So if you are someone who's thinking about, I would argue, working in strategy consulting anywhere, whether it's Bain or even their competitors, probably a good listen.
Yeah, no, brilliant.
Other than that, Alex, people can continue to write to us at info@clearadmit.com. We will write back. Just use the subject line wiretaps, and we love to hear from you. We also love to see your reviews and ratings, so please remember to do that if you can. Otherwise, Alex, anything else before we talk about our candidates for this week?
Let's kick on.
All right, so this is Wiretaps candidate number 1. Our first candidate this week has 15 schools on the target list, and it's a long list, but it's a sort of who's who of the top schools. They've got Carnegie Mellon, they've got Cornell, Dartmouth, Duke, Emory, INSEAD LBS, Michigan, Kellogg, Stern, Booth, UCLA, UNC, UVA, and Yale. And this person wants to start in the fall of 26. They have been working in corporate strategy, and they mentioned in the kind of consumer durables space. They want to get into consulting after business school. They have a 795 on the GMAT. That's an incredibly high score. As you know, it's out of 805. So it's almost a perfect score. Their GPA, on the other hand, is a 2.9, so well below the average at top schools. And they have 4 years of work experience. They're located in Turkey. And they mention in the comments that they left on their post on ApplyWire, they said, I think my biggest challenge is my GPA and lack of strong extracurriculars during and after college. No, I know the content of the application matters the most, but I'd be happy if you could give me your opinion on what my ceiling is in terms of high-ranked programs based on these issues. So, yeah, Alex, what do you make? I know you had some back and forth with this candidate and got a little more information, but what's your take here?
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of almost your classic huge test score, poor GPA overall, and the question, there's certainly no question that this person isn't super smart, right? I mean, you can't get a 795 on the GMAT without being super smart. But their commitment, right? So are they committed to the academics, et cetera, You would imagine now, several years later, coming to the MBA and investing in the MBA and so on and so forth, that they would be much more committed to the academic process. But Adcom are going to be worried that, the candidate would skate through classes they're interested in, not pay much attention to other classes, and maybe not get as involved and engaged, et cetera, as they should, and is simply there just to get the degree and move into consulting. So they would probably prioritize consulting recruiting and ace that, etc. So they've got to overcome that sort of commitment maturity aspect, and so forth. I mean, again, that 795 on the GMAT is extraordinary. I assume they can show some of that developing maturity through their work experience, and they would want to get their recommenders to really talk to that, and that they've performed super well, etc., etc. The other thing I'd like to see from this candidate is more understanding of what that long-term goal might look like. Because it's easy to say, I want to do consulting post-MBA, because that's what 30 or 40% of people say they're going to do. It's a natural fit right after the MBA, no matter who you are. But I'd kind of like for this candidate to learn more about where they see themselves in sort of 5 or 10 years' time, how they're going to maximize their impact through their long-term goals and so forth, and demonstrate that sort of foresight and maturity, almost kind of like our Smith Adcom was talking about, and so forth. So I'd really like to see that. And yeah, the extracurriculars, maybe they're a little bit weak. Maybe that's a cultural thing, etc., etc. But I'm more concerned about what the low GPA and the super test score says and how they can mitigate for that, and coming up with better developed goals to further demonstrate that maturity. I think that would be really good. And yeah, they asked a pretty blunt question: what's my ceiling? And I think someone with a super test score, Graham, with a modest GPA, maybe top 16, top 20, before you really start to scrutinize other elements of the application. I don't know. What do you think? I mean, I know once you get out of that M7, you get into the next tier and the following tiers, that test score, ironically, in my book anyway, becomes more important.
Yeah, this is tricky. I mean, I think there are people with a 2.9 who get into an M7 program. It does happen. But you're right. I mean, it's a big hurdle. And so as a result, you'll notice their list has only a couple, I guess, of the M7 programs, and the rest is sort of more top 20, right, type schools. And then they have a couple of international programs in INSEAD and LBS. But my concern here is, I wonder if there's like a pattern here of, they're good in a short burst, right? They can go in, take the test, have an amazing score. But over the long haul, when they have to focus, the GPA is low, 2.9. It seems like they don't have any long-term committed sort of outside interests or activities, or they're not, they mention that they just don't have strong extracurriculars. And so I really worry that they need to add something there, or at least flesh out something that already exists, hopefully. Maybe they do some things that they're not considering here. Maybe they're, I don't know, even simple things like maybe they regularly work out or run, or, what is it that they do with their spare time? Or they just all work and no play. I mean, that's, they risk sounding kind of one-dimensional. I do think the good news is it's easy to fix the goals issue, right? They could look carefully at their work experience to date, talk about consulting in a specific niche after business school, and then maybe doing something in that domain in the longer term. I also think culturally, if they are Turkish, and it sounds like they might be because they live in Turkey, that could be interesting as well. Maybe there's something, I don't know if there's anything in their background. I would certainly play that up because it's a unique thing, and we don't see a ton of Turkish candidates in the applicant pool the way we do from other markets. So, but yeah, it's tricky. I mean, I really think that they could benefit from doing what we would call some transcript repair if they had time. I don't know if they could, have time to do business fundamentals by GMAT or MBA math or one of these programs online to just show that they're taking that effort. Because I worry, otherwise. But look, I think they could get into some of these schools.
And you make a really good point. I don't think they need to take business fundamentals, MBA math or whatever to demonstrate that they're smart enough to get in.
Right.
They need to do it to show that commitment and that maturity and a degree of self-awareness to recognize, as they have done in their Apply Wire post, that this is a problem, right?
Yeah, totally. So that's really what it's about.
So show the commitment to the process.
Yeah. So anyway, I mean, look, if they had come in and said, "Oh, I'm applying to Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton," I'd say, "Wait a second," but they have a broad range of schools here. I don't think they'll be able to apply to all of them, but I would recommend, take a flyer on one or two M7, have some of those S7 schools in your list or whatever we call that next group, top 16, and then look at a couple in that last batch in the sort of top 20, 25. But in any event, I think they have some work to do. Flesh out those goals, do some online coursework to show that you're aware of the low GPA and working to address it. And yeah, go from there. I mean, hopefully they have some outside activities too that they can highlight, even if they're not formal, volunteer work or something. Hopefully they have some interests.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, I want to thank that person for sharing their profile on the site. And I should mention, Alex, I think our listeners know this, but you need only fill out an ApplyWire entry on our site to be eligible to be talked about on this show. So if you're wanting feedback, just fill out an ApplyWire entry and we may cover you on the show. Let's move on, though, and talk about Wiretaps candidate number 2. So our second candidate this week has 8 schools on the target list, and none of them are in the United States. They have Cambridge, ESADE, IESE, both of those being in Barcelona. They have the Indian School of Business, INSEAD, London Business School, Oxford, and Bocconi in Milan. So some of the very best non-US schools in the world on their list there. They want to start in the fall of 26. They have an undergraduate degree in journalism, where they had a 9.2 out of 10, which I guess they translate to like a 3.8. They were at the top of their class in all 3 years of that undergrad. It was a 3-year degree. They also have a master's in international studies, where they had a 9.05 out of 10, and they were at the top of their class for 2 years in that program. They have been thinking about working in consulting or nonprofit. After business school, they mentioned Bain, BCG, and McKinsey as targets. They have 4 years of work experience, and it's a bit, I'll get into it in a second here, but it basically, they did a year at a think tank, publishing articles and things and doing some reports. Then they worked at a top business school as a research associate for not quite a year. And most recently, they've spent almost, 2.5 years at an American policy advisory company. And they've been promoted 3 times and are expecting a 4th promotion in short order. It's a multicultural kind of setting. They deliver analyses for over 20 different jurisdictions. They're specializing in European and Middle East, North African markets in the research work that they're doing. Other than that, they started a PhD, they mentioned, at one of the schools, it sounds like in India, but they had to discontinue that due to injury, they say. So I don't know much more than that. They're 28 years old, male, Indian, and current role the title is Senior Public Policy Analyst. So Alex, they give us a lot more. I mean, they have a lot of extracurriculars, et cetera. This is one of the longer ApplyWire entries that we've gotten. And I should point out, they haven't taken a test yet, but they're planning to. And they say, on the practices, they're getting 315 to 322 on the GRE. So they haven't yet taken it. But what do you make of this candidacy?
Yeah, I think we need to see a test score in the late 320s.
Yeah.
And I responded to that on ApplyWire.
Mm-hmm.
When they... After I read through their entry, and it's a fantastic entry, so lots of detail, which I actually really appreciate. I was expecting when they talked about the GRE that they're practicing at around 330 because they've got a fantastic academic record, etc., etc. So I think it's really, and quite frankly, it looks to me like they've only just started studying for the GRE. So I'm just concerned that they've only just started looking at doing an MBA. And sort of throwing the hat in the ring quite late. Ironically, they've got to apply in the first round to the extent that they can, if they can, right? So they're sort of up against the wall. They want to get the GRE taken in August so that they can apply in the first round. But they really do need to sort of knuckle down, maybe take a bit of time off work to really ace this test, to complement their academic profile. A concern that I have, Graham, is a lot of their work experience. It demonstrates they're probably super smart and so forth, but it's very much sort of research oriented, writing papers, etc., analyst. and so forth, and less actually doing. So advising, creating guidance and stuff. And yeah, you could argue that's what junior consultants do or whatever it might be. But I'm just a little concerned they might come across as someone that hasn't actually done stuff. So I think towards the more recent work experience, they've also talked about implementing some really interesting sort of technical solutions, automation, and so on and so forth. So that might help balance that potential red flag, as it were. Because again, like you said, their outside activities actually tell me that they're probably pretty good, a leader, captain of their sports teams, teamwork, etc. So outside of work, they're showing some of that quality. It's just in work, maybe they've had more of a singular role doing the research and so forth. So, I think this is a very capable candidate. And I think there are certain things that they absolutely need to get done in a very short order, i.e. really perform well on the GRE. And with a strong story, I think, they're targeting the best European schools. That's quite interesting in of itself. But I think they're going to be a pretty strong candidate.
Yeah, they say they want to work in the Middle East, Singapore, or India. Yeah. So, they have reasonable targets because of that. I mean, obviously, if you go to Harvard or Stanford, you could work in those markets too. But for some reason, they have, this sort of focus on non-US schools, which is fine. I'm really of two minds on this candidate. So on the one hand, I look at the profile and I'm like, wow, really interesting to see an Indian male who majored in journalism and then did a master's in international studies and is working as like a public policy analyst. I mean, it's just not a common profile.
Yeah.
Because normally from India, we see engineers or computer programmers, and that's the stereotype at least, right? So on the one hand, I'm like, wow, this is kind of an interesting candidate. The numbers are fantastic when you look at how they did academically. And so you say, wow, and they've got 4 years of work experience. It's interesting work experience. But then there's another part of me that looks at this candidate and says, like you're saying, I think the technical term is policy wonk, right? Someone who's like kind of nerdy and isn't like out there doing so much as writing papers. And so there's that element that they might have to combat a bit. But as you correctly point out, they have all these extracurriculars where they've had leadership roles and, captain of their cricket team, et cetera. So they could potentially stand out that way. But I think where you and I absolutely agree is that they need to hit this test out of the park because, number one, they still are an Indian male, so overrepresented in the pool. Number two, these grades would suggest that they need to have a very high GRE score or that they should be able to get a high GRE score. And so if they come in low on the test, you suddenly say, wait a second, maybe that journalism degree or international studies degree wasn't so challenging after all, if they just sort of breeze through it and then can't do well on the GRE. So as you said, I would encourage them to buckle down and get this test taken care of. I also think it'd be nice to better understand, a little bit more about the goals. I think they could have some very interesting goals, in the sort of consulting, but also maybe that sort of public-private intersection domain. So they can think about that. But, again, they could go work for, the OECD or the World Bank, or the people do those types of jobs sometimes out of business school too. So there's a lot of options here. And I do like this candidacy. I just want to encourage them to take the test seriously and not rest on the high GPAs and stuff.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So anyway, I want to thank them for, sharing their profile. Best of luck as they buckle down for that test, which is coming up soon, I think. And yeah, we'll see how it goes. And yeah, hopefully they can get everything together and some apps in for round one. Let's move on though and talk about Wiretap's candidate number 3. So our third candidate this week has 6 schools on the target list. They want to start school in the fall of 26, and they're looking at Tuck, Michigan, MIT, Kellogg, Chicago Booth, and Darden. They have been working in chemical engineering and engineering sales. They are looking to get into consulting after business school. They have a 745 on the GMAT. Again, another great score. And they have a 3.95 GPA in undergrad. They've been working for 3 years. They're based in Chicago. They're pretty active in their industry in terms of professional development groups and networking. They're also on an associate board for a nonprofit in Chicago. They have somewhat less conventional work experience, they say, because they've been working in engineering and now for a small sales engineering firm. And they say that they did not go to a very prestigious undergraduate university. And I know you had some dialogue with them, and one of their concerns seems to be, is like a consistent concern around, I didn't go to a fancy university and I work in this sort of tiny engineering firm doing engineering sales things now. And so they're a little worried about that stuff. But Alex, you set them straight, right? You had a conversation or some exchange with them on the site. But tell me what you think of this candidacy.
Yeah, I was just listening to their target schools that you read out, and it does occur to me that maybe they got to be looking at, a Harvard, Stanford, or Wharton to be a bit of a reach school. But why not, right? I mean, their concern is, I work for a no-name company, I've not had a promotion, and I went to a no-name university. And I'm exaggerating that no-name, but you get my point. My counter to that point is, well, it doesn't matter what university you went to, you've got a chemical engineering degree and you've got a 3.95 GPA. So, I mean, that's pretty remarkable, I think. So that shows a lot of dedication to the craft, et cetera, Chemical engineering is not easy. I don't care where you go and so on and so forth. Yeah, sure. Because they went to a school with no national reputation, the Bains and the Goldman Sachs didn't come bashing down their door to recruit them, right? If you went to an Ivy League school, you'd have much more access to more mainstream, whatever, opportunities, etc. But you go take up your role, whatever it might be, and you can only do as well as you do. And it seems to me that whilst they've not had a promotion, and that's just the nature of the firm, they've been able to tackle progressively, larger projects, etc. And I think, again, just having promotions is not the way to show growth. Growth is illustrated through the complexity of your work, your role, etc., as well as your impact and so forth. So talking about the substance of the work and having the recommenders talk about the substance of the work is going to be far more important than just saying, I've had 3 promotions and that kind of stuff. So, and as you point out, they're active outside of work and so on and so forth. So quite frankly, Graham, this is an outstanding candidate, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think sometimes people get a little caught up in the, my firm's not well known or my school's not well known. And I think that could matter if you're not doing well in either of those environments. But as you say, because they kind of hit the ball out of the park in a very challenging major, 3.95, there's not much to argue with. And the GMAT bears that out. So imagine a scenario where you'd say, this school's a no-name school. Everyone graduates with a 3.9 in chemical engineering or something. But then look at the GMAT. I mean, they hit that out of the park too. So clearly super smart. I like also that they've transitioned, it seems, from doing sort of engineering work to getting into more of the business side. It seems like now they're doing, marketing strategy, internal operations, et cetera. So I feel like they've already begun that key transition from technical to business, and that bodes well too. So I there's a ton to like here, and I think you're right. When we look at this list of target schools, now they may want to stay in Chicago, and so they have the 2 Chicago schools on the list. But you're right. I mean, maybe they should be throwing taking a flyer on Harvard or Wharton or something. I don't know. I mean, they may have certain preferences. I do see that the schools that they're targeting for the most part are small, close-knit. You look at Tuck, Ross, even Sloan, much smaller than many of the other M7, and then they have Darden right on the list. So the 2 Chicago schools on the list, they're much larger, but this person's in Chicago. There may be reasons they want to stay. So yeah, I don't know what drove this selection, but obviously you could get into consulting out of Harvard or Wharton too, and I think they could be competitive at those programs. But again, can't argue with this list. I mean, they have some really great schools here, and they seem like they have a good head on their shoulders. So I like this candidacy a lot.
Yeah, the list is very good. But why wouldn't you apply to one of the top 3? I mean, if they get admitted to all these programs, yeah, maybe amongst these programs is their top choice. So I'm not debating that.
Sure.
But, they may always want to know, could I have gone to Harvard? Could I have gone to Wharton? right? So put in a flyer.
Yeah.
Would be my suggestion.
Yeah.
Get rejected somewhere, then you applied to the right schools.
Right. Yeah. Good point. Yeah. So in any event, I want to thank them for sharing their profile and wish them luck as they head into the admissions process here this season. Alex, thanks for picking these out. I know a lot of the folks who've been joining us with our weekly webinars that we've been doing, those essay webinars, have submitted to ApplyWire, and hopefully those will keep coming in and you can keep finding really interesting cases to discuss on the show. But let's do it all next week if you're around.
Very good. Stay safe, everyone. Take care.